Hey guys, welcome back to The Curly Reader. My name's Amanda, and today I want to share with you all of the books that I read in the month of June. Alright, so during the month of June, I was able to read 15 books. So that's quite a bit. I am not doing the best at my annual goal of reading slower, like slowing it down and not reading as much. Because reading is really that's my entertainment. I don't really watch a whole lot of TV. Occasionally I'll get in the mood to binge watch some old shows. But really, I don't watch movies that often. I don't really do much of anything else besides read and occasionally watch BookTube. So that's really my form of entertainment. And I've been trying to branch out and do a little bit of different things this year. But really, I'm finding that I just want to read. I will say that the one area that I am doing good in is that I'm slowing my audiobooks down. So not necessarily slowing them down, but I'm not speeding them up intentionally to try to get through them faster. I'm making sure that my audiobook speed is the speed that I enjoy the book at. Not that I can comprehend it at, but that I'm enjoying it at. And so I'm making sure that I'm reading for enjoyment and not just to power through stuff. So there is that. I am doing better at that, but I'm still getting through a ton of books. So also this month, I will credit Keisha from A Book Like You had mentioned on some of her Insta stories, I think, that she had been listening to audiobooks while playing Happy Color on her phone. And I'm like, oh, that sounds dumb. It's color, because I do color by number, by hand. But I'm like, it's on your phone. You're not really accomplishing anything. And then lo and behold, I downloaded the app. And I am completely addicted to that game. Obscenely addicted to the point where it's almost embarrassing. So I blame Keisha. And I now have gotten Krista from Books and Jams addicted to it too. But it is the best game to play if you just need something to do while you're listening to audiobooks that's completely not productive at all and just wind down time. It's great. So, I mean, if that's your jam, go for it. But I listened to so many audiobooks so fast because I would just sit and play Happy Color and listen to my audiobooks. So anyway, I have, like I said, read 15 books. Of those 15 books, let's get into some stats. Of those 15 books, I didn't have a single 5-star read. I read some really good books that were really close, but just nothing that was a new favorite for me. I did, however, have 7 4-star reads, 6 3-star reads, and 2 2-star reads. I also had a total of 10 books that I borrowed, got from the library, other places. I'm also counting my NetGalley books as borrowed, even though they're technically, I own them. They're e-arcs, and so for me, I'm not considering that. If a publisher sends me a physical book, I consider that owned. But books that, because I don't purchase ebooks, I will get free ones from Kindle occasionally. But so for me, that's borrowed because I probably won't go back to it. So just to clarify there, because I do have a few NetGalley books on this list. But then I have 5 owned, physically owned books on my shelf. I have 8 audiobooks, 7 books that I read physically with my eyeballs, 6 middle grade books, 3 YA books, 6 adult books, and 2 graphic novels. So that's kind of the breakdown of the stats for the month. So, and then I also had 1 book that I DNF'd this month. I ended up DNFing The Night Tiger by Yangzi Chu. I was buddy reading this with a couple of people, and I got, a few chapters in, and I'm just the writing just was not working for me. I didn't want to read it, and so I just set it down, and it didn't intrigue me enough to where I wanted to maybe continue it later. So I actually have already book swapped that with another book with a friend, and it's no longer in my possession, but I did DNF that book this month also. So let's get into this a little bit. I had 4 books this month that really stuck out to me in a negative way. And so I want to talk about those first because I was talking to my mom actually a little bit about this. Her and I talk about books quite a bit. And I was telling her, I was like, I read these 4 books that I could think of right off the top of my head that just had questionable moral content in my perspective. and it really made me reevaluate what I'm reading and why I'm reading it. I am Christian, and I do hold like fairly conservative Christian moral values. And there were some books this month that just, for me, and I'm not saying that like if you're a Christian and you like these books that you did anything wrong. Like everybody has different things that affect them differently. But for me personally, this just was something that didn't sit quite right with me. And so the first of those books was The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. The thing that bothered me about this one specifically, it is about a social worker in this fantasy world that is kind of a inspector of sorts for orphanages that house magical children. And he is really good at his job. He's really good at like separating from the emotion that goes with the job. And so he gets sent on this special mission to go to this orphanage that nobody really knows about because it houses some of the most dangerous magical kids in existence. And I kind of knew the premise of that, but I didn't really know any of the other details. That's pretty much all I knew going into it. It wasn't a book that I really felt the need to read or that I was really interested in, other than a lot of people were saying that it's middle grade except adult. It's an adult book, but it reads like a middle grade book, and you guys all know my love for middle grade. So it was on my radar for that reason. And then I had a friend who was getting ready to read it, and I'm like, let's just buddy read it. So I read it with her, and my issue with this is that one of the children in the magical orphanage that he goes to, the main character goes to, is the Antichrist. And throughout the whole story, you're told that he's more than the sum of his parts, and he can be good, and there's good in him too. And I had such a huge problem with that because in my point of view and from my religious perspective, I believe that the Antichrist will be a real person and not a magical being, and that there is no good in him, that he is there as the spawn of Satan. And I know that that kind of may seem totally out of left field for a lot of people, but from my personal religious beliefs, that's what I personally believe, and that may not be what you believe, and I respect your right to disagree with me, but I personally could not get on board with this book for that reason, because this what I feel it will be a real person was perceived as a fictional person that was made, or a mythological person or being that was made out to be someone who was perceived as evil but was really a good person. And I just I couldn't get on board with that. And so I think I ended up giving this one 2 stars because I had such a huge problem with that. Also, I felt like the writing was like, how do I say this? The author was trying to push an agenda, and I could tell that throughout the whole book, and I felt like it was being shoved down my throat to the point where I was choking on it. As far as you have to find your place to fit in, and you can't mistreat people who don't look and act like you, and you misunderstand people because you don't give them a chance, and that whole thing was just like shoved down your throat so much that it just wasn't for me. So that was the first one. The second one is a romance book that was recommended to me, and that is Talk Bookish to Me. I don't remember the author of this one. But this is an adult romance that has a bookstagrammer as the main character, which I thought was a lot of fun. You don't really see bookstagram as, you know, or really the book community, the online book community portrayed in books very often. And so I thought that that was a very clever thing to do. The main character is a writer who kind of has writer's block. She writes romance. So she is going to her best friend's wedding. They're getting ready for it, and like the week leading up to it, they have a big dinner. She's the maid of honor. She goes to this party and she finds out that the best man is actually her ex-boyfriend. And they had split up kind of not on the best of terms, but through a series of events. It's kind of like a second chance romance thing. But there's a strong theme of infidelity in this book that really made me question it, and I didn't understand the ending of it. I was just like, why why are we making these decisions? This is a bad decision. Like, and it was just made out to be fine and happy and everyone's okay. And I'm like, ooh, this is not going to work out well for you. So that was one, and I'm not going to get into more spoilers in that because, like, I don't want to spoil the book. If you want to read the book, go for it. I ended up actually rating this one, I think, 3 or 4 stars, because I actually really enjoyed the book, like the reading experience of it. But then at the end, I'm like, why? Why is this happening? Why is this okay? Why is this being made out to be okay? Like, I don't understand. And so for me, that one was just like, no. But the actual reading experience of it, I actually thoroughly enjoyed. So I don't know. It was just, that was another one that was just weird for me. All right, and then the third book that kind of fell into this category was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have read every single thing that Taylor Jenkins Reid has written. Like, I've read all her backlist, her short story, like everything that she has published, I've read. And this, for me, was a big miss. I was not the biggest fan of Daisy Jones and the Six either. I really liked The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I really liked a couple of her backlist stories. And I really liked her short story too that's out. And so for me, like, I've liked those, but I did not like this one. For me, this one was just so full of infidelity that I couldn't stomach it. Not to mention, like, I know a lot of people, okay, start over. This is about a group of siblings that are the descendants, children, of a rock star from the 50s. This book is set in the 1980s, I think 1983, in Malibu, and it basically is following these siblings during their, like, big annual summer bash party that they have every year. They're all into surfing and just beach life and, you know, all that. Throughout, you find out at the very beginning that by the end of the night, this mansion is going to end up on fire, and it's kind of the progression to get there. You get flashbacks of their parents' relationship from the 1950s and their, like, childhoods, and then you kind of get the perspective of each of the kids as they are going through the night and kind of the day leading up to this party. And then during the party, you're also getting perspectives from a bunch of the guests at the party, which was just very random, and I didn't care for that at all. I could care less about any of that aspect of the party. The party itself was, like, just way too much for me. I was not into it. But then, like I said, there was so much infidelity. Just like every single married person in the book was cheating on their spouse, was being cheated on by their spouse. It was just like a whole thing, and I could not, I couldn't. I got like halfway through the book and I'm like, I don't like the way I feel reading this. This is not making me feel good. This is making me feel angry because this is not the way real life is. Like, you don't have this whole community of people where every single person is miserable and is being cheated on or cheating on their spouse. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand it. And maybe that's me in my naive little brain living in my Midwest town, you know, maybe. But I like living in my little Midwest town in my naive brain because I'm happily married. And I'm like, I don't understand this whole infidelity thing was just really a lot for me to stomach. And so that one got 2 stars for me too. I just did not care for it. And then the last one that of the 4 that I was talking about that fit into this is actually Outlander. So I listened to Outlander, and I really wanted to get into this series and read the whole series this year, but I made it a goal to just read the first one, and I'm kind of glad I did because I don't think I'm going to be continuing with the series. I actually thoroughly enjoyed the most of the series, or most of the book. The part that for me just got to be like too much was like the last quarter of the book. There is a sequence of events that I had a really hard time reading and stomaching, to the point where like I don't want to watch the show now. Like, I haven't seen the show before, or I hadn't seen the show before reading this, and now I don't want to watch the show because I don't want to see that. Like, I don't want to spoil anything, but it is just, it's not okay. It's very disturbing, morally. Like, I can deal with like people being flogged and people being killed and like things like that, because that's the time that you're living in, you know, like 1700s in the Scottish Highlands, people are not kind. I get it. It's when you get into that like moral thing that I'm just like, nope, I'm out, because it's gross and it's disturbing, and I don't need that in my brain. I don't need that in my heart, and I'm just not okay with it. So unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be continuing on with this series. I did give this 4 stars because I did like, you know, 80% of this huge book, and it was a really long book to read, and I enjoyed so much of it. I enjoyed the characters, but that aspect of the book, I don't want to continue with it. So that's going to be it for me, I guess, with Outlander. But I mean, if the subsequent books are better and don't have that type of content in it, if you've read the book, you probably know what I'm talking about, because it's that final, like, you know what I'm talking about. Let me know, like, if the subsequent books don't have that type of content in it, I may be willing to like keep going with it. But for now, I'm trying to kind of be a little bit more particular about what I'm reading, so that I'm not subjecting my brain to that, because I think it was just too much this month. I'm typically pretty good about like reading things and being able to like separate myself from it, but this month I just, for some reason, it was really starting to get to me. So yeah. All right, now on to some of the books that I actually thoroughly enjoyed and would recommend. All right, so there were a few that I read that were just okay. They weren't anything great. They weren't anything awful. I read 2 graphic novels through NetGalley, and I will put on the screen as I talk about them when they actually come out, if they're not out yet, because I didn't write it down. But the first one is called My Own World, and this is a book about a boy whose brother is sick, and he kind of finds this, not wormhole, but he kind of finds this entrance to a magical world where he can create whatever he wants, and time doesn't continue on in the real world while he's there, and so he can just kind of be there and be separated from what's going on with his brother. And it was really interesting. It was a really cool concept, but there was this very weird like time jump in it that didn't really make a lot of sense. And so it got 3 stars for me. It was just okay as far as graphic novels go. But there was that one. And then the other one that I read that was actually really interesting was called Stealing Home. And I did not write down any authors' names on my list this time, and that was a big mistake. But all of these books will be linked down below, so make sure to check them out. But Stealing Home is actually about a Japanese-Canadian family. It's set in Canada during World War II, and it's about the internment camps in Canada for Japanese Canadians. And this one specifically talks about the culture of the baseball culture within the Japanese communities and how important it was for them, and even how they played it in the camps and how it helped boost morale and that sort of thing. And so it was just a very interesting take on the Japanese internment camps. We've been getting a lot of graphic novels about the Japanese internment camps, specifically in America. So I like that this one was set in Canada, but also that it kind of had a different spin on it with the baseball thing. So definitely, especially I think boys would be, and like boys that are into sports, this would be a kind of a fun way to tie in some historical fiction in with that. And so that one was actually really good too. I gave both of those 3 stars. All right, and then I read Luck of the Titanic by Stacey Lee. I don't know, guys, this one was really disappointing to me, which I'm not excited about. This was on my anticipated releases. I think I had it on my middle grade anticipated releases, but I think it's actually like young YA. I think it really bridges that gap between middle grade and YA, but I think it's technically YA. There's not a lot of content in it, I don't think, besides maybe a kiss that would put it in that YA category. But this is about a Chinese girl who is trying to find her brother, I think it's her twin brother, and he has been hired to work on the Titanic. And so she sneaks onto the Titanic to try to find him, because she has found out that one of the people, like head people from the circus, is on the boat. And so she wants to kind of approach them and see if they can be hired as acrobats, because their father had taught them how to be acrobats. And then things kind of go from there. Obviously they're on the Titanic, so you know where things go from there. But it just kind of follows them. And I guess this was written kind of in response to some newfound documents and newfound evidence that there were some Chinese people aboard the Titanic that survived, and kind of what happened to them, and kind of what has gone on with them since their survival. But yeah, so this for me, it was not that great. The storyline was just okay. It was kind of boring. It didn't really get into the Titanic aspect of it until like the last 15% of the book. Like the sinking of the Titanic was really just like the last 15% of the book. So there wasn't a lot going on with that. There wasn't a lot of descriptors. The characters were all kind of meh. It just, for me, was a big miss. And so that one got 3 stars. I don't know. Like, there are better Titanic books out there. There are better Asian culture books out there. I get the trying to mesh the two, but I feel like there needed to be more depth and there needed to be more to the story for me, and there just wasn't. So, yeah. Then I read with Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly. Her and I buddy read together Finding Jin Kim by Ellen O. And this one, I was really excited to read it because it had to do with the Korean War. We are really not taught much, if anything, about the Korean War in our history, or we weren't when I was growing up. Maybe they are now. I don't know. In the schools here in the US. But this had to do with a girl who was up against some bullying at school, and she starts developing severe depression. The onset of the depression is very rapid and very severe. And so it kind of follows that. And then also she gets an assignment in school where she needs to interview someone from like the previous her teacher's talking to her about like the generations that had like the Vietnam War and the Korean War and World War II, and like how there was a major war that defined each of the previous generations. And so she needs to interview someone from one of those generations and get their story about how the war affected them and just the culture as a whole. And so she decides to interview her grandfather and starts becoming even closer to grandfather. They're already a very close-knit family, and then things kind of go from there. So you're getting her present day story, then you're being told her grandfather's story. Eventually you also get her grandmother's story throughout this whole thing. This book was way too gory and like graphic for a middle grade book. Like, it was disturbing for me to read as an adult, let alone an 8-year-old child, 10-year-old child, whatever. I think this book would have been great if it would have been aged up. There are definitely content warnings in this book, for sure. Just as far as war violence goes and violence against civilians during the war. I personally, as an adult, am glad I read it because there were a lot of things that happened that I had no idea about that I'm glad I know now. However, would I hand this to my 10-year-old child? Definitely not. Absolutely not. So there's that. There's also some pretty severe things that are going on in the present day timeline. The bullying that she is facing has a lot to do with racism. She has friends of multiple different races that are being faced with the same bullying. It's very, very severe bullying, and the school isn't really doing a whole, I mean, they're taking action against it, but as a whole, it's just kind of seen as like, this is what's going on. And it just, I don't know. It was a lot. It was a lot for one book, for sure. There is grief, there is the depression, there is the war violence, the violence against civilians, there's the extreme racist bullying, there's attempted suicide as part of it, which I'm actually personally happy to see in a book like that, because in a book for middle graders, because I think that that's something that middle graders deal with, that they need to be able to see and recognize. However, that in combination with it was just too much. definitely this book, like, and I know Kelly has said this too, like, I had to step away multiple times because it was just too much. And I feel like this book should have been aged up, and it would have been a much better, like, it would have gone over a lot better for me. So this one got 3 stars. That was very long, but there you go. All right. And then I read both Shadow and Bone and Siege and Storm with Krista from Books and Jams, Lindsay from Lindsay's Little Library, and Sarah from Sarah's Nightstand. We read Shadow and Bone and Siege and Storm both. This fulfilled my Read Your Bookshelf challenge from Chantel at An Intentional Life, because it has an animal on the cover. They both do. I'm sure you know what these are about by now. I gave this one 4 stars and this one 3 stars. I thoroughly enjoy this series. I just think it's fun. It's not the best thing I've ever read. This one especially, there were some like, what's happening? But this one, they're fun. And it's just a YA fantasy series. This is a reread for me. The adaptation's out on Netflix now, which is why I wanted to reread it. And I'm having fun with it. So there's those. I also read, I buddy read this with the same person as The House in the Cerulean Sea, which is Amanda from the Reading and Writing Life. We buddy read The Bookshop of Yesterdays by Amy Meyerson. This was a cover buy for me from the thrift store. I loved this book. It was so good. I had no idea what it was about going into it. Like, even when she's like, hey, you want to buddy read it? I'm like, sure. And I just like hit start on the book and I had no idea what it was about. But this book follows Miranda, who, when she was 10, I think it was 10 or 12, her uncle, who was like her bachelor uncle that was always there for her and they always had fun together, her uncle and her mom got in a huge big blowout fight and they haven't spoken to each other since. And then now as an adult, she gets a phone call that her uncle has passed away. And then she starts getting these notes that are all literary in reference, and it's kind of like a scavenger hunt that her uncle sent her on, that's all based around books. It's so much fun. And so like this book, it didn't blow my mind. I had figured out the big twist early on. Actually, Amanda figured it out like in the first 3 chapters of the book, but I was like, what? I didn't even think about that yet, you know? And so she figured that out really early, but figured the big twist out, but it was just fun. And it was such a smart book. The way that the scavenger hunt and the literary references were all built in there. It has to do with like Shakespeare and Jane Eyre and Bridge to Terabithia and like all these books that are so well known. And her uncle owned a bookshop, and so that's why it kind of had to do with books. It was so good. Like, I just had so much fun with this one. It was predictable. It wasn't surprising. It was still fun. So this one got 4 stars, and I'm so glad I read it. Like, who'd have thought? The next book that I read is another adult romance that I thought was so much fun. This is another Nat Gallia book that I read, and it is called If the Shoe Fits. This is the first book in a new series that Disney Publishing is putting out, and they're all like retellings of the Disney princess stories. This one was Cinderella, and this one, it actually reminds me a lot of the premise of The One to Watch that came out last year, which I never read. But it has to do with a plus-size main character who ends up going on a show similar to The Bachelorette, which to me sounds just like this other show. The twist here is that her mom is actually the producer, or her stepmom is the producer of the show, and her 2 stepsisters are going to be on the show with her also. So that's kind of the whole twist. You have the Prince Charming, you have the, you know, all the things. And so it was just fun. There was a lot of references to, you know, the plus size and how she's being perceived by others and all of that. It was just fun. It was one that I read through really quick because I just didn't want to put it down because it was just hitting me in the feels. It was working for me. So that one I ended up giving 4 stars because I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would recommend picking it up. If you're in the mood for a romance that has Cinderella vibes, go for it. All right, on to some middle grade. I finished my last read aloud with the kids for the school year, and we finished up A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Albus. This is a World War II historical fiction. that follows 3 kids that are being evacuated from London. They were orphaned and they were living with their grandma, and their grandma recently passed away. And so the lawyer that's kind of handling her estate thinks that they should be evacuated and see if they can find somebody to adopt them in the town they're evacuated to, but don't tell the people, sort of thing. And so that's kind of what's going on here. They bounce around from house to house to house because they can't, just situations keep coming up. It has to do with a librarian who is amazing. It's wonderful. I will say I ended up giving this one 4 stars instead of 5 stars just because, like, I have read better middle grade historical fiction personally, and I think that me spacing it out and reading just a little bit of it at a time with the kids and like dragging it out kind of actually hindered my reading experience. Normally it doesn't, but I think with this one, if I would have just sat down and like powered through it, I probably would have gotten more attached to the characters. But I did end up giving this one 4 stars, and it was beautiful and wonderful, and I loved it, and you should read it. Another middle grade book that I picked up that everybody was talking about, has been talking about, is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. This one was fantastic. This is another one that I ended up giving 4 stars to, only because like the main twist in it, I figured out really early, and I thought it was super, super, super obvious, and it was kind of annoying to me how obvious it was. So there's that. And then there were just a few other things throughout the book that I'm like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but you know how I am, me and my believability, that's a huge thing for me. So anyway, but this has to do with Amari, whose brother has gone missing, and then she finds out that he has nominated her to like join this secret magical guild, and then we find out she is like, it's kind of like the savior thing, you know, where she has the power to like actually help, sort of thing. It's very interesting. I am excited to read the next one. I will definitely be continuing with the series. This is a fantastic middle grade fantasy series to put into the hands of young ones. And I love that we're seeing a main character of color on the cover, like, and how it's just part of her identity, and it's discussed, but not in a bad way. And it's, I love it. Not that it should be discussed in a bad way. That came out wrong. But yeah, it's just wonderful. I loved it. So that one got 4 stars from me. That was a really high 4 stars, if we're being honest. And then let me make sure that I have talked about all of these. I have my journal. I think I only have one left. Yes. Okay. The last one that I had is another NetGalley book, and I have it upstairs. I forgot that I had gotten it out of the library for my daughter. I'm not going to go up and get it right now, though. It is called The Best Worst Summer, and I don't remember who it's by right now. But like I said, it'll be a link down below. This one was so much fun. I actually talked about this one in my mid-year book freakout tag because it was just fun and it made me smile. But this is about a girl set present day who had to move away from her best friend for the summer, and she's distraught. She's out back planting in the garden and finds a time capsule that had been buried there some years before, actually in the 80s, in 1989. And so she digs up this time capsule and finds some things in it and decides she's going to look into these kids that buried the time capsule and what was going on with them and why they put the different things in the time capsule. It was so much, it's so much fun. You get her point of view, and then you also get the girl who buried the time capsule. You get her point of view in 1989, and you get all these references to the 1980s, early 90s, New Kids on the Block and pagers and the fashion and going to the soda shop and the mall, and it's so good. It was just so good. And it has to do with friends and what happens when friends move away, or, you know, what happens when you can't be close to that person anymore. And kind of, it's really hard when you're a kid and your best friend moves away, or you may move away from your best friend, and how do you continue those friendships and make new friends in your new location. And it was so good. It was just one of those books that just made me happy. I've talked with my kids about it. Like I said, I got it out of the library for my kids because one of them like heard me talking about it and wants to read it. So I hope she does, because I thought it was fantastic and I gave it 4 stars. Another high 4 stars from me. So that's it. Those are the 15 books that I read during the month of June. If you've read any of these, I would love to hear your comments about them down below. Let me know your favorite book that you read in June as well. Sorry, this was such a long one. I got very long-winded there at the beginning. I apologize for that. But yeah, Other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you stick around and subscribe, and until next time, see ya!